Welcome. I want to take us on a journey today that helps us understand the environment that supports spiritual growth. The concepts I'm sharing with you were developed by Henry Cloud and John Townsend in a book titled How People Grow. I took the concepts and developed some metaphors and some imagery, which I'll share with you as we go. I suppose our starting place is, how do we actually grow spiritually? And how do we grow into spiritual maturity? Well, an infant takes their first step and suddenly they are no longer an infant, but a toddler. A Seattle coffee shop begins selling hot drinks with cool names like pumpkin spice latte or Java chip frappuccino, or my favorite, almond milk chai tea latte. No water, no foam, please. And in 20 years, we have a multinational corporation with franchises on every corner of the globe. A prairie farmer skillfully scatters their seed in the springtime, trusting that the right combination of weather and water and fertilizer will reward them with a mature wheat harvest. So growth is all around us. We see it every day in the trees we plant, in the gardens we grow, in the kids we raise, and the pets that we love and adore. Growth is essential to our human experience of life, as it is eating and drinking and breathing. Without growth, humans would exist perpetually as the unrealized potential of DNA in a single cell. Without growth, the Earth would resemble Mars. It would be starkly beautiful but dead. Without growth, there would be no hope for anything better than what we experience now. However, growth is ambiguous to most of us. As well, spiritual growth can seem slow and non-existent when viewed in comparison to the natural world. We don't know how to recognize it, cooperate with it, or even nurture it. Perhaps that is because we use words like discipleship and change, and we really don't know how and what they mean or how to participate in them. We live in a time where people are more sophisticated but less mature. Knowledge is so accessible, yet wisdom seems out of reach. This impact on spiritual growth is that a lot of us are only Christian in name because we've not discovered the process of spiritual growth. We're stuck or we're stunted. Bill Maher is an American comedian and a talk show host. He's one of Christianity's most ardent critics. Audiences find his commentary quite humorous because the irony is often tragically accurate. In fact, in one talk, he calls Christians back to their Christ-likeness, and it's all too accurate. Let me give you a taste of it. If you're a Christian that supports killing your enemy and torture, you have to come up with a new name for yourself. Capping the enemy is not exactly what Jesus would do. For almost 2,000 years, Christians have been lawyering the Bible to try and figure out how love thy neighbor can mean hate thy neighbor. Martin Luther King Jr. gets to call himself a Christian because he actually practiced loving his enemies. And Gandhi, he was so effing Christian, he was Hindu. But if you're endorsing revenge, torture, or war, you cannot say you're a follower of the guy who explicitly said, love your enemy and do good to those who hate you. And not to put too fine a point on it, but nonviolence was kind of Jesus's trademark, kind of a big thing. To not follow that part of it is like joining Greenpeace and hating whales. There's interpreting and then there's ignoring. It's just ignoring if you're for torture, as for most evangelical Christians are than any other religion. You're supposed to look at that figure Christ on the cross and think, how could a man suffer like that and forgive? I'm a non-Christian, just like most Christians. If you ignore every single thing Jesus commanded you to do, you're not a Christian, you're just auditing. You're not Christ followers, you're just fans. And if you believe that the earth was given to you to kick ass on while gloating, you're not really a Christian, you're a Texan. Maher's unbelief is actually biting hatred directed at the un-Christ-like perversions of God that we each hold. In a strange way, he's calling the church back to our center. You're supposed to follow Jesus. Now follow him. If so, what might be missing in our journey to growing spiritually? Is there a big picture to spiritual growth? Is there a process we need to cooperate with and nurture? Well, yes, there is. The big picture is the story of God and his creation that was lost and his work to restore it to himself. The big picture is important if we are to understand the process of spiritual growth. 2 Corinthians 5:18 and 19, it reads this. All this comes from God, who settled the relationship between us and him, and then called us to settle our relationships with each other. God put the world square with himself through the Messiah, giving the world a fresh start by offering forgiveness of sins. God has given us the task of telling everyone what he's doing. We're Christ's representatives. God uses us to persuade men and women to drop their differences and enter into God's work of making things right between them. In other translations, it uses this word ministry of reconciliation. That's what at the heart of the gospel. God is reconciling things to the way they were meant to be. At times we get comfortable and forget the way things should be and what the process of growth actually means or requires of us. Instead, we zero in on the problem, be it depression or lack of intimacy or being overweight. So we go after behavior modification, or what Dallas Willard calls sin management. We want the person to be better, and we miss actually what is called the ministry of reconciliation. Henry Cloud said it this way: it's much easier to focus on a particular problem or way that someone is missing the mark, which is what the word sin means, than it is to figure out the ways that the fall of human beings is still operative in the person's life, keeping them from the discovery of a redemptive path that will reconcile his or her life. So what happens is we end up focusing on the symptom, not on the root issue. We're not here to actually help each other feel better or do better. We're partnering with God as he reconciles all things to himself. In fact, here's the question: what are we trying to reconcile? It's an important one. Well, a big piece of that is seeing people become alive and aware and responsive to God, to have a relationship with their Creator and become followers of Christ. But beyond that, we see two emphases: to reconcile people to each other and to reconcile people to the life that God has created for them to live. Ephesians 4:18, Paul says this: we were separated from the life of God. We're to be reconciled to life the way it was meant to be. So there are 5 aspects to God's role and our role in the original story. In God's role, he's the source. In our role, we're to depend on him. Secondly, God is the creator, and our role is to be the creation that cannot exist without him. Thirdly, God is in control of the world, and our role is to be in control of ourselves. Fourthly, God is the judge of life, and our role is to experience life. And lastly, God is the one who designs life and the rules of engagement, and our role is to walk inside of those parameters and live the life God designed. The story of redemption purposes to get us back to these 5 realities. But what happened in the fall? Well, our desire became one where we wanted to be the source, to depend on ourselves, where we wanted to be the creator and we wanted to exist unto ourselves, where we wanted to actually have control of the world, and we tried to control the world and each other, and in doing so, we lost control of ourselves. We wanted to become the judge of life, to judge ourselves and others. And finally, we wanted to design the rules, and we wanted to live whatever way we wanted to. The New Testament uses 3 verb tenses to describe salvation, or what we might call the ministry of reconciliation. It says we are saved, we are being saved, and we will be saved. The application of redemption is the process of growth, returning everything to the way it was meant to be. This is why we actually care about the environment. This is why we stand up to injustice in the workplace. This is why we fight against the abuse of power in relationships and communities. So the process of redemption starts with this return to a created order, God in Christ reconciling all things to himself. He got back his creation and is putting it in its rightful place. So what am I saying? That solving life's problems and growing spiritually are one and the same. As we return to the created order, we have to journey back to dependence, to become dependent on God as the source of life. And we continually surrender our independence again and again. We learn to accept our incompleteness to our humanity, which helps us to see our need for dependency on God, because all around our incompleteness is God. Thirdly, the process of reconciliation involves letting go of control. We give up trying to control the things we cannot control and yield and trust God. And what we do regain is control over ourselves. We regain self-control in doing that. Fourthly, When we give up the role of playing judge with ourselves and with others, we actually give up condemnation and wrath and shaming. We're free to experience ourselves and others as we really are. And when we stop being God, we are free, and others are free to be who they are. And lastly, we stop redesigning life by making up new rules and instead live the life the way God designed it. There's lots of process here, isn't there? We will leave part 1 right here, and we'll pick it up in part 2 by discussing why we get stuck and what the environment of grace and law look like, and actually how do we grow in grace. I look forward to it.